Are you ready, Marie? Do you think? Okay. I'd like to call the November 15th, 2018 City Council meeting to order, and we will have our opening provided by Councilmember DeCare.
Please bow your head and pray for God's blessing. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for everything that you have provided for us. We ask that you look over us and grant us a civil and a good meeting this evening. Please watch over us and guide us and direct us so that we may keep the city's business in mind and our residents in mind. And we ask these things humbly in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right.
If you would all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
All right. We have a special guest tonight that I'd like to recognize. Kristen Floyd, the Executive Director from Safe Harbor, is here. Kristen, would you want to say anything? Yes, come on up.
I'll be brief because I know you have a full agenda. I just wanted to share some information. I am with Safe Harbor, the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Crisis Center here in Davis County, and I've just wanted to make sure that I've been able to meet with all the different councils in the cities to let them know some different things that are happening in your community. We have just opened a new sexual assault nurse examiner's room in Davis County for us to be able to facilitate exams for individuals that go through a sexual assault, and that is in partnership with Intermountain Layton Hospital, which is a room that is outside of the emergency department, where historically we've had to do those exams in the emergency room. This is a partnership that will allow us to do that outside of the emergency department. Historically, Davis County has also utilized services from an organization outside of Davis County to be able to facilitate those exams by another nurse examiners group. We now will have our own nurse examiners group for Davis County in order to use that facility and to serve the residents. So just really wanted to share some of those new things that are happening in the community. Right now we're at full capacity at our shelter, and have been running at full capacity for as long as I can remember. We are constantly at full capacity. So we are also in partnership with Intermountain in building a new outreach building across from the Layton Hospital on some land there, and looking to do a capital campaign to increase the size of our shelter and our transitional apartment complex units that are in Kaysville. So just wanted to share that information with the council and the city, and if there were any questions.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And Councilmember Barber.
First, I think it's fantastic we have this resource, so thank you. How's the outreach center different than what we have here in Kaysville?
So the outreach center, which is located in Layton, is for individuals specifically that don't need to come into emergency shelter. So they receive much of the same services as far as assistance with protective orders or housing or economic empowerment, such as help with employment. We have our children's services there, diversity advocacy there. So much of the same services, they're just not residing in a shelter.
All right. Kristen, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Now we will have our fiscal year 2018 annual audit presentation. Ready to go? Dean? Oh, and one housekeeping item. We do have Councilmember Garn. He's on the phone right now, and he asks specifically for council members and staff to talk into the mic so he can hear.
Thank you, Mayor. We have completed the preparation of our financial statements for fiscal year 2018, fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. And as required by law, we have an independent audit on our financial statements each year. So we have Aaron Hickson from Hanson, Bradshaw, Malmrose, and Erickson tonight to present the findings of the audit and the process that he went through to conduct the audit. I'd also like to mention that we have Cami Moss here, our accountant, and Cami is responsible for much of this. I want to publicly express appreciation for what she does for the city.
All right.
So, with Aaron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I am happy to be able to report this. Much of what I do is behind the scenes, and so this is really the only tangible product that I'm able to provide to my clients, and I'm happy to do that also as a resident of Kaysville. I particularly enjoy meeting here at Kaysville City's council meeting. I will go over the report briefly. It's a very long document. It's 118 pages, and so I will not, to be honest, bore everyone with all of it, but I do believe that it is a well-drafted financial statement. It is a comprehensive annual financial report, which is more robust than a typical basic financial statement. It is not required to have this robust of a document. It is something that management has elected to do. And in fact, they submit this for an award each year, and they did receive the award that they have in years past, and that just means that it's excellence in financial reporting, and so I commend both Dean and Cami on that. On page 9 of the financial statements, this is the independent auditor's opinion of the financial statements. There are 3 letters that we claim as our firm, and the rest of it is prepared by both Dean and Cami. The opinion on page 9 and 10 and 11 is a clean opinion. It's called an unmodified opinion. And I will just briefly point you to the opinion paragraph at the top of page 10. And that basically just says that, in our opinion, the financial statements present in all material respects the financial position of all of the activities of the city. And so we could not give a higher opinion of the financial statements. The next section of the financial statements is called the Management's Discussion and Analysis, or MD&A. And this is where I'm going to focus all of my energy and highlights during this presentation, because it presents the same information, it's just in comparative format. Throughout the other portions, it is just the current year information. And a lot of what I want to discuss is just comparing to what it was last year. And so if you turn to page 13, you will see the financial highlights. And briefly, the city's net position or equity increased by a little over $4 million, and that's about a 3% increase over the prior year. Most of the equity in the city is through capital assets or fixed assets. In fact, of the total equity of $151 million, $125 million includes buildings and other assets that are not liquid, and so you can't use them for operations. But of the $151 million, $16.8 million of that is unrestricted and available to meet the city's obligations. At the fund level, or for the government funds, for the main operations, you had an increase in your equity of about $2.8 million. And the business type funds, which represent basically the utility funds, there was a slight loss before contributions of $2 million. After contributions, it dropped significantly. What I wanted to also highlight is the long-term debt position of the city is great. You don't have any general obligation debt, and you have bonds that that you need in order to meet the needs of the citizens that are secured with property taxes or other revenue sources. The most recent was a project that you had in a park in Pioneer Park. There was a financing of just over $1 million to build that, and that is for the betterment and the enjoyment of the citizens. I will turn to page 17, and this again talks about the capital assets. And as I said, $1.5 million was spent to better Pioneer Park, and then also there was a large project on 200 North and Angel Street of about $2 million, and that was financed through a grant and awards from the state of Utah. Again, the city has no general obligation debt. I highlight that again because that is unusual. There are a lot of cities that take out general obligation debt, and the city is able to operate without that, and that is commendable. On page 19, we'll go over that says that the general fund, or your main operating fund, had revenues of about $15 million, and that is an increase of approximately 4% over the prior year. Sales tax increased about 8%, and that just shows, that correlates with a strong economy. When the economy suffered about 10 years ago, those increases were not expected, and a lot of times you would see cities having to hunker down and really wait out that storm, if you will. And so revenues increased about 4%, and the expenditures increased a similar amount overall. At the top of page 20, this will give you the capital projects that occurred during the year. You can see in the current year, or as of June 30th, 2018, there were about $5 million in capital projects in that fund of expenditures in comparison to about $1 million in the prior year. That was the projects that I mentioned, the Pioneer Park, as well as the improvements on 200 North and Angel Street. And then, as you are aware, the city has implemented a road fund project to better the roads throughout the city, implementing a new utility fee for roads, and so those increases are expected. That is pretty much the highlights of what happened during the year, and I wanted to go to the last two reports that I mentioned. The first one is found on page 113. So the difference between a for-profit and a governmental audit is, one of the differences is that government auditing standards require us to look at the internal control environment of a city. And we meet with management, and we will observe the various processes that take place, and just to make sure that the internal control environment is designed well and that it's functioning as designed. And I believe that the city has great internal controls, and any time in the history that we have done this audit, when there has been an identified weakness in controls, I believe that management and the city council body take seriously these weaknesses and does what they can to strengthen those. And I believe that this year is no exception. I believe that the controls in place are good, designed well, and are functioning. And so we did not issue any modification to that opinion. There is another report that we are required to issue, and that is a report required by the state of Utah. The Utah Auditor's Office asks us to look at certain things, and most of them are compliance with state regulation and laws. And there was one issue with 3 subparts that we found of noncompliance. We did not believe it was a material matter of noncompliance, so it was just inconsequential. They are required to let us know anytime an individual fund in total expenditures is over budget. And there were 3 funds: your municipal building authority, your debt service, and your capital projects. And that is found on page 118. And that just tells you that these 3 funds in total were over budget by the amounts listed. This does not tell the whole picture, so I just wanted to make sure that we're only required to tell you when expenditures are over budget. There is a corresponding revenue that was also, all of these expenditures were approved by council, and they are expected expenditures. What happened is it was just inadvertently left off on amending the budget. So both the revenue as well as the expenditure was not amended. And so this is just a technicality that we're required to report to the state of Utah and also let you know. It is fixed. So it's a timing issue, and it's just showing the expenditure side. And so you may or may not get a letter from the state just saying, what are you going to do to change this? The recommendation that you see listed by us, as well as management's response, is adequate in our opinion, and I don't believe that there is any further action that needs to take place. It was just inadvertent, and budgets are amended all of the time, and this just was an oversight, nothing more. Right. So I'm happy to field any questions that any of you have.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Any questions from council? Nothing? Councilmember Barber.
It was obvious you were impressed that we don't have any general obligation debt, but give me an example of what other cities would use that for. Like what would it be utilized for?
A new court, or a new courthouse, or a new city hall. A lot of times, so there are 2 types of debt. You'll take debt that is tied to a revenue stream like taxes, or you'll just say general obligation, which the only way you can pay for that is through the property tax revenue, and so you would just increase property tax. The state makes us calculate the total debt potential of general obligation debt, and you can't have it at a certain level. Mm-hmm. You have 0. So
we're well below that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Jake, any questions? Or Councilmember Garden, sorry.
No, not at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hickson. We appreciate your time. And
thank you.
Really, thank you, Dean and Cammie, for all the work that you've done on this. And thank you for getting us keeping us on the straight and narrow, as it were.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, next is declarations of conflicts of interest.
I have a familiar relation to an agenda item, but it goes no further than that.
Okay. All right. And also, Councilmember Adams is perfectly fine to sit here and participate in the conversation as well as vote. So as long as everybody knows that he does have his family owns some land. But all right. Let's go to consent. Whoever moves this, I would like to remove I for a quick update.
That's what I was going to remove.
Okay. Anybody?
Mayor Witt?
Yes. Councilmember Garn.
Yeah, I just have one friendly editorial suggestion.
Sure.
On the first, on the September 20th, September 20th minutes, the first vote, we have Councilmember Hanson voting aye, and I think that should probably be changed to Councilmember DeCare.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
Thank you for that. Okay. All right. I'll entertain a motion at this time.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent items with the exception of item I.
All right.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember Barber, seconded by Councilmember DeCare with that amendment. Councilmember Adams.
Just a quick comment. So at the tail end of our agenda, we have a work item where we're looking at changing our current city policy that the community development director is supposed to be the city engineer, and that's right now our ordinance. Do we? And I'm all in favor and supportive of Lyle being our director here, but in a housekeeping comment, do we need to wait until that ordinance is changed? Wherein, unless I know Mr. Gibson's not an engineer, which is fine. We're looking at changing the ordinance. But is the cart before the horse on that?
Okay. Which item are you referring to on our consent?
C.
C.
The appointment of the new community development director.
Which
He's
correlates with
Correlates
item
down
B.
saying, can we appoint him
Item B.
without amending the
Work
ordinance?
item B.
Nick?
You could approve it subject to the ordinance being changed.
Okay.
You could appoint him as interim acting community development director, subject to the appointment, subject to the ordinance being changed. But Councilmember Adams is correct. It's somewhat cart before the horse, although it might be a technicality.
Okay. How would you recommend that we adjust the motion? Or should we remove that item?
Yeah. we should-
Probably makes most sense to remove that from consent and then handle it on its own.
All right. Thank you.
I'll make a secondary motion.
Or
Can I do that on my own?
You can amend your motion.
I'll amend my motion to remove item C as well as item I from the consent items.
I'll second that.
Okay. All right. It's been moved by Councilmember Barber, seconded by Councilmember DeCare. Councilmember Adams. Vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes unanimously. Let's go to C. All right. Would anybody like to take a stab at this?
I had a comment first.
Yes,
It's probably
please.
a good thing to pull this
Councilmember
out.
Barber. Yep.
Anyway, I just wanted to say I think it's great we have a new community development director and maybe talk about the direction that we're going with community development, because now we'll have another open position because it was filled internally. So first,
Right.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Hello.
I think I don't want to do a deep dive in that right now. That is still being talked about, and but it will come back to council. All right. But how should we perhaps suggestions, Shane, on how to?
I agree with Nick. If we want to just even hold off or make a
Okay.
temporary motion to
Table?
table
Should we table
it,
it?
or
All right.
or even so you could even accept it
Contingent?
subject to
Yeah.
Okay.
the passing or changing of that ordinance,
Okay.
which would be not until December 6th.
All right. Thank you. All right. So, anybody want to take a stab at it?
So I'll move that we table item C on the consent item agenda, the appointment of Community Development Director, Mr. Lyle Gibson, until our next reconvening of City Council.
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember DeCare, seconded by Councilmember Page. Comments?
None.
All right. Let's go to a vote. Councilmember Page?
Aye.
Councilmember Garn?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes unanimously. All right, let's go to I. And I did want Lyle to I just wanted basically for the public to know what's coming up. I think this is pretty exciting.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to share a little detail about it. So UDOT annually does a grant program, Safe Routes to Schools, where they're looking to help aid communities improve their infrastructure for essentially children to get to their schools. Kaysville City, we made an application in conjunction with Centennial Junior High. We worked with their principal in looking at the rail trail that's identified as one of their preferred routes for the kids to get to the junior high. And so doing that, we've identified 6 locations that qualified within the range that the grant was looking at, and are proposing to put in pedestrian activated signals. And so they wouldn't be the overhead kind like you see here at Center Street or 200 North, but rather signs on the side of the road that when a pedestrian or biker pushes a button, and then a flashing sign will go up on both sides of the street, alerting cars and others to that person's intent to cross, so improving safety at those locations. So the funding that was awarded, it's just shy, I think it's $39,500 towards the purchase of, it's actually 12 different signs for 6 different locations, so you cover both sides of the street. The city's participation would be the installation of those signs. Part of the staff report, however, that we've suggested as staff, this essentially covers the entire DNRG rail trail, with 200 North already having an overhead signal, with the exception of Phillips Street on the far north end. And so we've recommended just completing the trail improvements based on those items identified in our active transportation plan, and purchasing an additional 2 signs for a total of about $6,500 to get that last and final location along the trail within Kaysville City signalized for those. So,
and so I think that's going to be a great amenity, make the rail trail even more usable. And so it was kind of fun watching our staff talk about this, and our Cole Stevens was saying, hey, I'll have my staff assemble the signs. If Public Works, you'll put them out. And so it's going to be a great amenity to that rail trail. So thank you for all the work that you did to get that for us here in Kaysville. Thanks.
Can I have a suggestion?
Yes, Councilmember Barber.
I think it's the survey or the application that we had that was included in the packet. I'm assuming Centennial was the school that filled it out. There's just a couple pieces on there. There's the question about, is bike ped safety curriculum taught inside or outside the school, which the answer was no. And do we hold walk bike safe to school events? I just thought those would be 2 great things for our community to take on, especially with this new emphasis on safe routes to school, or encourage it to be done at Centennial.
Yeah, that's a great idea. All right. Any other comments? Okay. I'd entertain a motion for I.
I'll make a motion that we approve acceptance of cooperative agreement with UDOT for safe routes to schools, funding for pedestrian activated crossings along the DNR GW rail trail. Consent item number I.
All right. It's been moved by Councilmember DeCare, seconded by Councilmember Garn. Any other comments? All right, let's vote. Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
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 All right, motion is unanimous. All right, let's go on to action items. First, we'll do preliminary plat approval for South Angel Street subdivision at approximately 1300 West Rocher Lane with J.D. Horn. Sorry. Lyle?
and if you don't mind, Mayor, I'm sitting down tonight because I think I project better into the microphone, so hopefully that helps Councilmember Garn. But just as a quick introduction, on the far south end, southwest side of Rocher Lane, the proposed property is currently an RA residential agricultural zone. Mr. Horn, the property owner, is proposing to split one lot into 2. They'd be 2 standard half-acre lots, fairly straightforward. They do meet the half-acre minimum lot size and the required frontage. The Planning Commission held a public hearing and reviewed this at their meeting and gave a unanimous recommendation for approval to the City Council.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
All right. I do not have anybody signed up to speak to this item for public comment, so I'll move on to questions from council. Any questions from council? Councilmember Garn, do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
All right. Councilmember Barber? Councilmember Adams? Okay. I'll entertain a motion at this time.
I'll move that we grant preliminary plat approval for South Angel Street subdivision at approximately 1300 West Roche Lane, J.D. Horn.
Second the motion.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember DeCare and seconded by Councilmember Adams. Any comments at this time?
None.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Garn, any comments?
I'm sorry, aye?
Oh, I was asking for comments. Sorry.
That's a no.
Okay.
No comments, thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's go to a vote. Let's start with Councilmember Barber
Aye.
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 and Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
All right. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, let's go to request to rezone 3.92 acres of property from general commercial to R120 single-family residential and another 1.81 acres of property from general commercial to light industrial zoning district at approximately 2100 West, 200 North with Terra Venture Development. Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you.
That's about the gist of it. No one can accuse us of not being specific in our agenda items, I think. This agenda item comes to you from the Planning Commission, who actually made a motion or a recommendation to deny this rezone, so keep that in mind as you deliberate. As the mayor mentioned, there's two different parcels that are looking for a rezone here, one from general commercial to residential, and one from general commercial to light industrial. We've included in your packet a development agreement. If you had the chance to review that, what we've tried to do is restrict the parcel that would be rezoned to residential for use as a church and a church only. And the other parcel that would be rezoned to light industrial, we've tried to restrict as either a storage unit facility or any other general commercial use. So it could be, again, used for general commercial purposes. Nick has reviewed that agreement. We're not saying it has to be approved tonight, but it's there for you if you want to motion and edit it in any way. I think that would still be appropriate. The applicant is here tonight if you have any questions of him, and we're also as staff here to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Now we will have our public comment. First, we'll have Taylor Spendlove. And I'll just let you know that you have 3 minutes. I'm very strict about the 3 minutes. And also think of this as kind of a courtroom. There's no clapping or booing or anything like that. So just carry on. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for giving us a second to talk about this.
Can I get your name one more time?
Taylor Spendlove.
Thank you.
I live in the New Hills Farm development. My backyard backs onto this property. When we first purchased our home, I did do my due diligence. I understood that it was zoned general commercial. I called the city to just ask what could go there. So I'm well aware that it's general commercial now, and that was kind of the expectation I had coming in. And I emailed you all this previously. However, when I heard that the rezone was coming up, I was excited about it. Even if it wasn't going to be a chapel, but it was going to be half-acre lots, it felt more like a fit to me and my family and the neighborhood. As you look at the development over by Smith's, that to me seems more like the commercial zone anyway. I could, as a developer myself, I can see that this general commercial area would sit for a long time and really wouldn't generate any tax revenue if you did get. I see it as small offices that would take a while to build. So I felt like the church itself would be a good fit and residential. I don't have personally, I won't speak for the neighborhood on this, but I don't have an issue with the storage units either. Other industrial uses are a concern to me. So I like the idea of a development agreement on that. I'm not necessarily think it's necessary to put a development agreement unless you want to preserve that commercial on the chapel. With the West Davis corridor coming in, I feel like it's too far away from to say that this is a good commercial spot for the West Davis corridor, because it's further down the street, and I think the way that the corner itself has been developed kind of shows what really fits there, and Hills Farm is a good example of that. Again, I'm in favor of it. I think a lot of my neighbors are, for the most part. Again, I won't speak for them on the storage units and stuff like that, because I think that's going to be the biggest hiccup for some people. But we'd love to see it rezoned. Lighting's an issue. We don't want to see a convenience store if we don't have to. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tammy Bassett.
Thank you, Mayor Witt, and I agree with Mr. Spendlove. We also live close to this and would feel it's a better fit for a rezone. Just wanted to add our support to that.
All right. Thank you so much. April Clark, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As one of the other neighbors in the neighborhood, we're strongly concerned about the impact it would have on our neighborhood and our property values. We strongly recommend and hope for the rezone and feel that it's a better fit for the neighborhood as it is now. So we're crossing our fingers and hoping that rezone does go through.
Thank you. Michael Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just would like to agree with those homeowners that have already spoken. I live in one of the homes that borders very closely to that land on the east side of our neighborhood is that property, and we know that a lot of changes will come with the west corridor coming through with Legacy Highway, and this is one thing that will make those changes easier going forward, as well as knowing what's going to be there versus the unknown of leaving it commercial. So I'd like to add that. And every neighbor I've spoken to has been in favor of it. I don't know of anyone that hasn't. I can't speak. I didn't speak to all of them, but everyone I have spoken to is in favor of it. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Beth Herman, please.
I just want to add to that, it's my direct backyard as well as Taylor's, and I just want to echo everything that everybody's been saying. We feel like it's best for our area.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Kara Enstrom. Is that correct?
I think it's Elstrom.
Onstrom?
Oh.
I'm sorry about that.
Again, I'd just like to echo what my neighbors are saying. I also live in the neighborhood nearby. I feel like it is a better fit for a larger, more residential area that seems to fit in with the area as well. It's a better opportunity for lighting for those homes as well, and then just traffic in general on that, what is likely to become a busy intersection area. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Crystal Robbins.
Hello. I just wanted to be another voice that said that I agree with the rezone and that I agree with everything all my neighbors said.
All right. Thank you, Crystal. All right. That's everybody who signed up for this public hearing. Would the applicant like to speak to this item?
That's pretty
good. Good evening. My name is Jeff Randall with Anderson Wallen and Associates here on behalf of Terra Venture Development. I think it's been explained fairly well tonight what the plan is for this property. We've talked with many neighbors and tried to work through that with them over the last year. We came to the Planning Commission a year ago and have gone back and come back and tried to work through this. The one thing that we would like to request in the development agreement, the restriction on uses on the R120 zone, There's 2 paragraphs in that. The first paragraph, if I remember from the top of my head, talks about restricting the use strictly to a LDS church. The second paragraph says that if we don't sell it to them by January 1st, we'll revert the zone back to general commercial. We are okay with the second paragraph. If we don't sell by January 1st, we'll revert. First paragraph we'd like to remove so that there's not a restriction on the church as to what they want to do. If they want to build a church, they're going to build a church, but it's their property once we sell it to them. So we would request that that first paragraph be removed, the second paragraph be left in within that section. Other than that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
When you say they, you mean the LDS Church, correct?
Yes.
Councilmember DeCare.
Sorry.
All right, thank you.
The Church of Jesus Christ.
There you go.
Thank
Right.
you. Get this right.
Sorry.
That
Thank
does
you.
not count as me commenting on the agenda item.
All right.
To satisfy you, Mayor.
Yes.
Clarification.
I'm still
All right.
in abeyance over here.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so any questions for either the applicant or staff at this time? Councilmember Page.
Yeah, hey, just one question. What's your main concern about that, having that paragraph out? Is it
The discussions with the church have been that I think there's been some comments made that we won't restrict them, that we will sell them the property as an R120, allowing, well, conditionally use allow a church or a chapel to be built on that property. And so we're trying to make sure we fulfill that contractual requirement with them and the obligation that we have with them.
okay?
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Councilmember Garden, do you have any questions?
No questions. I do have a comment after
Okay.
the motion.
I will get back to you for a comment. Any questions on this side? Councilmember Barber.
And I think this is in one of the other proposals, but can we talk about access to the different pieces of this development? So you have the offices on the fronting 200 North.
Yeah, so there's the existing office, the first office, the building that we built that sits about right in here. There it is. We have sold another piece of property off right here for a second office building to a dentist. And so that piece has been sold for another office building. And then there's plans for 2 more office buildings across the front. And there will be an access that comes in. So there'll be 3 buildings, an access, and then the 4th building. And that access would come back in, serve the parking lot of the office, but it would also be the access back into the storage units. And then the church would have its own access off of 200 North.
Thank you.
Separate from that.
Councilmember DeCare.
So both accesses will be off of 200 North then from
Correct.
the way that, okay.
Correct.
Okay. Questions?
I have another question.
Councilmember Barber.
Probably for staff. Can we talk about the surrounding areas and the access that's planned for those? Because there's a little more general commercial zone that is not included in this development.
Yeah, I'll speak to that, Councilmember Barber. So they're currently, apologize as I'm playing with the computer here, getting a pointer for you. So when the Hill Farms development was recently done and approved, there is a road that stubs into the back properties here on the west side of these other commercial lots. Otherwise, existing access would be from 200 North along those. Bigger picture, there's also roads stubbed in, or likely would be from, I believe that's Bonneville Lane to the south, that would access those properties as well. So when development comes, it gets to pick and choose a little bit of what it wants to do, and as a council and planning commission, we review that to make sure it meets requirements and specifications. But those are the 2 options apart from Angel Street and 200 North for getting into that area.
I guess I could speak. One thing on that too that was mentioned to the Planning Commission, Andy was still in attendance at that meeting, and his explanation to that same question was with those stubs of those roads, if it was commercial, it could be accessed off Angel. If it was to go residential, there could be a road that loops around and connects the 2 together so that you had lots on that road that kind of came up and then over into here. So he said that his plan was, as he'd worked through these developments, was if it went one way or the other, the city was covered one way or the other and planning for that.
Okay. thank you. All right. Any further questions? Okay. Seeing no further questions, I think probably what we need to do is first address the development agreement and then go to the rezone.
I have a comment.
Yes, or is it a question?
It's a comment.
Okay.
Kind of a general comment.
A general comment.
Yeah, about zoning.
No.
Okay. I'll refrain. But I do want to say it. I will.
Yeah, you'll work it in.
I'll work it in.
Okay, good. All right, so let's have a motion. Let's talk about, so Nick, would you recommend that we, do we need to do the development agreement first or at all? Can we push it?
Probably makes sense to approve the development agreement first and then the rezone.
Okay, all right. So,
and do both rezones, are they contingent on each other? Can we
do we do the rezones separately or together?
You can handle those in one motion.
Okay, thank you. All right. I would entertain a motion in regards to the development agreement.
I'll move that we accept the development agreement with the omission of paragraph 1 with regard to action item B with the rezoning of 3.92 acres and 1.1 acres.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember DeCare, seconded by Councilmember Page. Comments on the development agreement? Yes, Shane.
I think the playing devil's advocate about removing that, my understanding would be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints could then decide they want to put residential lots here and go ahead and rezone it for that, or not even rezone it, just put them in it. And that's my concern.
Okay. I think we have to.
Councilmember Barber?
I think we'd have to say, are we willing to accept residential, whether it's a stake center or it's lots that fit within this zoning? And that's the only way we would approve this development agreement change.
Okay. So discussion on that.
Discussion on that, I think, is warranted.
Any thoughts on that, Councilmember Page?
You asked me first, huh?
Yes.
Community development, man.
No, I mean, that is a tough one. There's no doubt about that. One good thing about the R120, it matches, you know, the surrounding environment. I'm sure the peoples definitely would be satisfied with that from what we heard tonight and the people that I've talked to. You know, I don't think I have a big concern that the church is going to turn around and get rid of it and turn around and go in the housing business, but I've seen stranger things.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Garn, do you have any comments about this development agreement?
Yes, I just echo Councilmember Page's comment that I'm not concerned with taking that paragraph out. I think that's very low risk that something undesirable could be built there in the R120. Okay. And it's hard to imagine what a church would build other than a church.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other discussion about this paragraph specifically, Councilmember DeCare?
No. I've been intimately familiar with this for well over a year, a year plus actually, and I've moved my opinion on this, and after seeing things and kind of looking at things from all sides on this, I echo with the residents here and the developer too, and that I think that this is all a really, really good fit for this neighborhood. So.
All right. Okay. I think we're ready to vote.
Oh, I had a comment.
Oh, yes, Councilmember Barber.
This is not really pertinent to this exact piece, but I've been looking at other cities, and a lot of cities have and Lila commented on that, have a zone specifically for churches that fit in there, and I wonder if that would make it easier for development agreements like this. Like that's exactly what this land use is for, and it takes away all of that question. But we do not have that.
Not currently. I'm going to just jump in and say, wait for it. We are going to be reworking our general plan next year. So that might be something
it's a good idea.
Address. So, all right. Any other comments, or are we ready to vote? I think we're ready to vote. Okay. Let's start with Councilmember DeCare.
Aye.
It's not all that often you get a chance to take a funny jab at your dad and your uncle. I'll throw a nay in there for fun.
Okay.
Aye.
Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes 4-1. All right. Let's do the rezone request.
Since I've made all motions this evening, I guess I'll keep on with that.
You're on a roll.
I'm on a roll, so we'll keep going. I will make a motion that we approve request to rezone 3.92 acres property from GC General Commercial to R120 Single Family Residential, and another 1.81 acres of property from General Commercial to Light Industrial at approximately 2100 West, 200 North, Kaysville, by way of Terra Venture Development.
Second. Anyone?
I'll second it.
All right. Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember DeCare, seconded by Councilmember Page. Any comments?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes. Councilmember Garn.
I have a comment. Thank you. Yes, I have a little bit of history with this too, because, well, first of all, let me say that it's very important to be consistent to me. And, recently I voted to deny a rezone request from commercial up on Deseret Drive near Boondocks. But I do think that's a completely different situation. In that case, in this case, a little bit of the history, I was involved in this before public service with Kaysville, because the Smiths was either going to go next to my house or out in this location. The reason that's important is it was zoned commercial at that time in anticipation of the Smiths being located there. But then when they did the Smiths did the rooftop circles and counts, found that it wasn't viable there. And so the reason that it was rezoned commercial at that time no longer exists. And with the other developments that are in that location now, it makes a lot more sense to rezone it and go according to the plan than it would be to keep it commercial. I don't know that there's really even that much interest in it. So although generally I think it's a good goal to keep all of the land in Kaysville that is commercial, in this case, that hasn't been the case. That hasn't been true with this location. And so I support the rezone.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Garn. All right. We're going to go to a vote. Let's start with Councilmember Adams.
No vote.
No, you can't. If you were
two separate items.
If you were, as I explained earlier, if you're going to be involved in the discussion, then you
Very
have
well,
to vote.
Nay. Carry on.
Okay.
Aye.
Okay. Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes 4-1. Thank you. All right. We're moving on.
Ivory or America First, if you're listening, just put a church on your property by Boondocks. You'll get it through.
All right. Let's go to action item C, amendment of Chapter 16-13, Retail Tobacco Specialty Business, Ordinance 18-11-2. And Lyle?
Thank you, Mayor. And again, apologize for going against the grain a little bit and staying in seat, but this way I can, on the computer here, get you guys the right information. So we did discuss this at the last meeting as a work item. I gave a quick introduction and also had it as a public hearing this evening, so it's one and the same. What we're looking to do is bring our ordinances into compliance and in alignment with this statute regarding tobacco specialty businesses. Effectively what it does, currently as a city, when somebody comes in to make application, we're requiring background checks from the property owner at that time that we review and look at from staff. And with some changes, other organizations are now doing that, particularly the health department. So for that reason, we're putting that in their hands. We do require verification from the health department anyway before we finalize and issue our licensing. And then also just to treat them similar to other businesses. While they're tobacco specialty, other convenience stores or grocery stores sell similar products, and we're not requiring that process or those checks. So it keeps our process consistent. We're backed by other entities that are doing the checks anyway, and it helps us stay in alignment and compliance with statutory requirements. And for those reasons, we're recommending the ordinance as proposed to the City Council for your consideration.
All right, thank you. No one has signed up to speak to this item, so we'll go to council questions. Any questions about this? I'm seeing no questions. I will entertain a motion at this time, and it's going to be somebody other than Councilmember DeCare.
Motion to approve action item C.
Okay, thank you. It's been, and a second.
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember Adams, seconded by Councilmember DeCare. Any comments at this time? No comments. All right, let's go to a vote. Councilmember Page?
Aye.
Councilmember Garn?
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes unanimously. All right, now we're moving on to our work items. Shane?
That 6A there, Mayor, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. Since that last meeting, we met with MHTN and asked them to put together some costs and a possible timeline, and we've included those in your packet for your review. Ryan is here tonight. If we do have additional questions or things that come up in the last couple of weeks, we're happy to address those. But again, we're looking for a motion to move this to action for a possible contract with this organization that we can get started on public process and some of the things that we've suggested. So.
Thank you. All right. Questions at this time? Councilmember DeCare?
No, not a question.
Any questions? All right. Comments?
Oh, because we don't.
Comment? Oh.
I think we can ask.
Just a comment that I voted on this in advance for a 2-week stay on this. I was given a lot of information on this by city staff and our mayor. I've been given the whole idea and the scope and the vision of everything, and I have a better understanding of things and moving things forward. So that's my general comment on this. So.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Barber, anything?
I think my question is on the basic fee proposal. Like, what are we actually approving tonight? Is it the contract, or is it?
No, we are just moving it to action.
Yeah. Just to get there, and then that's when we'll get to the fine details of.
Well, if you, it's in our packet. Yeah. It talks about the costs associated, and it is so. And those are a ceiling, not a floor. Okay, so it could be less than that. The other thing to keep in mind is their fees are kind of a percentage of what we end up building, and so that what we end up paying them will be what
we decide to build.
Or exactly.
Not build, or
and that's
whatever
why it's kind of not cut and dry, right? Is because the decisions have not been made. So we will work with the architect to come up with what works for Kaysville. All right, Councilmember DeCare.
Just one other quick comment, kind of a clarification for myself on this. I actually did a lot of research on this over the past couple of weeks after I was given all this information and that, and it was a bit overwhelming. But I did take. I think the biggest thing that I took away with this was something that city staff commented on during our last meeting. In fact, I think it was our city manager, Shane Scott, that the percentage that the architects charge, their fee essentially, is very, very across the board. It's a very standardized, community to community and job to job and things like that. So, I mean, you look at it and it may seem, a little exorbitant. The mayor made the comment at our last meeting that, we don't cut our own hair and we have to, go and have somebody to do those things. And, and I get that and I understand that. So, it's the price that we pay to, take care of our city staff and to, like I said too, I think I mentioned the fact that our Kaysville has grown over the past 20 or 30 years exponentially, and our building here hasn't. And I think that that's something that I commented on a social media post that we did, and I get it, and I understand that. And it's this building's 30 years old, and it's time to expand, and it's time to make things better. I think for our city staff and. And ultimately, for our elected and appointed officials too. So that's where I'm at with things.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments about this before we have a motion? Councilmember Garn, yes.
Thank you. It's interesting on this, as far as the architectural fees and engineering of the building. That's really where the rubber meets the road. Otherwise, it's just bricks and mortar and serves no purpose. But the design of the building is so important, and it's so important to determine what the needs are. And this is an essential need, too, to move forward with this now, because costs are only going up with the economy being so strong in Utah. And we do need to move forward. The other point I would make with regard to public input to the design, it would be really difficult. Like if you came to me and said, what do you think of the building? It's a real need. I might say, yeah, I can see that that's a need. But I wouldn't have the expertise to design a building. I could certainly evaluate it or assess it when I saw different options. And so for the community at large, I think it's important to have a plan or some options. And you can't get to that point until you engage the architect, to engage us, the public, to see what's possible. And that's why I think it's so important to move forward now. Move this to a work item, and let's get rolling.
All right, thank you. All right, any other comments? Councilmember Adams.
I think we need to ensure, if we're not, then I think we need to move forward with working in conjunction with the museum committee. We have just, there was a movement up here. I don't really think it was a collective movement, but there was a movement by a few up here to give that building to the museum committee. And without knowing what direction they're ultimately going and what they're able to produce and planning on producing, I think we might be a little bit cart before the horse again here on moving forward with this side of things. Once we commit to this contract, we commit to spend money. And if something happens over there to where there could be a marriage made with that building, if it ultimately comes down to that, once again, I think we're moving too fast. I like to move fast, don't get me wrong, but I don't think we're moving on the right path. And the other comment I would make is it does seem like we are taking on a whole lot of new staff. I mean, there was a squashed comment earlier about the fact that our new director, which is great, or soon to be, hopefully, director there is leaving a vacancy in his current role. And are we going to fill that or not? I mean, I'm not trying to have a conversation on that. I'm trying to caution us on how much staff we're hiring, though. I mean, I don't think, we're really exploding ourselves here, and I don't necessarily see the need.
All right, thank you. All right.
I have
yes, Councilmember Barber. Yep.
I would say to that point, I think that's part of the exploration. What we go through is what we do with the library, and that's why we're going forward. What's the vision of the entire experience? And so, absolutely, I think that helped me this past few weeks to look at. We're not committing to any final solution. We're committing to working together with professionals to help us decide what that is. And the museum committee has to be part of that. So that's helped me understand what we're actually committing to right now. And the future might include, part museum, part something else over there. We don't know.
Yeah. All right, thanks. And I do want to mention that our city manager and I have been working with the museum group on a weekly basis. So we are working very closely with the museum group. They are in and out of the building over there a couple of times a week. So we are definitely working with them. We're trying to help them as much as possible. So that is a great relationship that we have.
It's a good opportunity.
Yeah. All right. I would entertain a motion at this time to move this to action.
I'll make a motion.
I move the architectural RFQ to a work item.
Thank you. And a second?
Action item?
Yeah.
Do you mean action item?
Action item, yeah.
Councilmember Garn?
Oh, I'm sorry, action item. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'll second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded, moved by Councilmember Garn, seconded by Councilmember Barber. Any comments? All right.
Just a quick
Councilmember Hare.
That I do agree with Councilmember Adams and Councilmember Barber too. That I think that having this all work in concert together, I think moving this forward and stuff. I think we will get some clarification and some vision and some idea of how we want to do this whole thing. And I think it's a good thing. So.
All right. All right. Thank you. Let's start the vote. And it is Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
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 Nay.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes 4-1. Thank you. Okay. Now we will move on to our proposed city engineer ordinance change. Nick.
Thank you, Mayor Witt, members of the City Council. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. We have for your consideration a work item amending city engineer, the ordinance that outlines some of the duties of the city engineer. Presently, the city engineer is required to be the supervisor of the community development department. That seemed pretty specific as we looked at the potential way we would fill the city engineer spot. And so we looked around at some other cities in the neighboring communities and how they handled this, and most of them have a city engineer but don't require that person to be the supervisor of the community development department. We felt like it was appropriate to remove this as a requirement. It would certainly not prohibit the city from hiring in the future a city engineer, making them community development director or department supervisor, but it wouldn't require that. And sometimes those skill sets are better suited, engineering skill set is better suited to different avenues. Not always, but sometimes. It also removes a reference to specific portions of the Utah Code, and as we amend ordinances, that's probably something you'll see frequently. It's sometimes a headache to keep up with changes in the state code and make sure that those kind of changes, references to specific ordinances, are updated in our city code. So that's the reason for that. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I want to put some bumpers on this discussion, right? So we're not talking about what comes next. All we're talking about is this specific ordinance, amending it so that we cross out that the community development director must be the city engineer. Okay. Any comments specifically about that? Anybody have a problem with changing the wording of this ordinance? Councilmember Garn, do you have anything?
No, I don't. I'm fine with the change.
All right. Councilmember Adams.
I do want to express concern, just the fact that you steer the conversation. For us to make a decision without knowing if we make this decision, we create two positions, is a little bit evasive and controlling, in my opinion. So
I think that is a good point, that we will have to have that discussion.
But you're asking us to make a decision without knowing the full ramifications of the decision, and you're controlling the conversation.
Which is my job as the mayor.
Not when it comes to spending the tax purse, because you could be creating another $90,000 position.
Okay.
With the void that we leave here, we don't know about that. We don't have the totality of information.
I think it would be good. Shane, do you want to speak to that?
I do. We, as you remember, I brought this to you before we went out to hire a replacement for Andy, and I did mention that we are concerned about replacing him, and that we maybe it was just me, but I didn't want to replace Andy with Andy. I didn't want to replace the community development director with the city engineer tag to it, and I did feel like I had support of the council at that time. We went out and went through a process to hire a community development director. I think we got the best one we possibly could get. None of the ones that we were open to an engineer, and we didn't say you needed to not be an engineer, you needed to be an engineer, and I think an engineer would have still worked. But even if Lyle was an engineer, we weren't interested in having him serve as the city engineer. We'd like him to be the community development director. We'd like him to be the planner. We'd like him to be able to take and be a little bit more proactive in our planning efforts in the city. That was my goal, and I feel like that, again, I think I had some consensus from the council in that regard. So here we are here with Lyle. I'm convinced he is the best person for this job, bar none. And Councilmember Adams is correct in that I can't tell you today what we want to do with city engineer. We have Mr. Belknap, who happens to be here for the next item, is also an engineer, is going to be serving as our city engineer. We had a very good meeting this morning with both Lyle, Josh, and with Andy in making sure that nothing was slipping through the cracks. I was very, very excited about that. We've asked both Lyle and Josh to do a lot more than they've been doing. But at the same time, if you think about some of the things Andy did, they tended to be of a public works nature. So while we're asking Josh to do much, much more, we're not outside of his wheelhouse in any way, shape, or form. If we could go without a city engineer and just have Josh be that person, that would be exciting to me. I'm skeptical at best. And some of the very basic tasks of a city engineer are reviewing plans and those things, and right now we're going to be farming those out to Andy as a consultant. That'll probably save us a lot of money over hiring somebody, but I'm concerned in the future of how much Josh can take on. So far, so good. He may not be sleeping well at night, but he's doing a wonderful job, and I'm very happy with how things aren't slipping through the cracks. But Councilmember Adams is correct in that I just don't know what the future holds. I do disagree with Councilmember Adams about us having ballooning staff. We are a very lean shop. We're told that all the time. I would compare our staffing to anybody else's of our size and put that up against anyone in this state and maybe in this United States. We are very lean. We do a lot with very few people, and I want to continue to do that. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. But there are breaking points in that, and I will obviously take those to you when the time comes. We won't hire a city engineer without you knowing about it first. We won't be hiring any additional personnel, except we will replace the people that we've lost. If we promoted Lyle, we are going to replace Lyle in some way, shape, or form. We're still discussing that. Right now is a good opportunity to make some changes in the city. We're talking about those extensively before we make any decisions. But we will not add another person without you knowing.
Thank you.
Maybe that's
Councilmember DeCare, you had a question.
Well, not a question,
a comment.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think, though, that as we look at this, and, you know, I think all of us here are, I mean, I've been intimately familiar with, you know, the city and that and stuff since I've been here for the past decade plus, and you know, we do run very lean, and, you know, we like to promote ourselves as a place to live, and one of the best places to live up and down along the Wasatch Front, and it is. And, you know, I feel that having a bona fide city engineer, and, you know, nothing against Mr. Belknap, but I mean, he can't do both jobs. I mean, that's asking way too much. And with the promotion of Mr. Gibson, you know, which is a great thing, that does leave a void. But, you know, replacing Mr. Thompson with a bona fide city engineer is just the way that it has to be. I mean, we still have 10,000 more to go on our build-out, you know, for the next decade or so. And it's prudent, and it's needed, and it's a requirement to move our city forward, period.
Okay.
Allow me to clarify. I could have spared you the last 10 minutes of emotion and you know, incorrect response. I'm talking about, and I believe I referenced it, the void that Lyle's leaving. He's not our engineer. He's leaving. There will be a position there. As I've said it before, that I think we should be hiring an engineer. And my understanding was we were going to hire an engineer next. So I'm just putting that out there. I believe that's the way it was left. So I'm talking about Lyle's position that will be voided. I do think we need an engineer. I never said we didn't. So these tirades and these emotions over here were unnecessary. So That's fine. And the other concern I would say, something that popped up, I mean, we're just arbitrarily handing over all of our engineering work to our former engineer now? Where's the 3 bids? Where's the open process? And we don't need to discuss that. I'll leave it there. I'm sure you'll fix that, but come on.
Thank you. All right. I would entertain a motion at this time.
I had a comment.
A comment? Absolutely.
On the ordinance itself is all
Perfect.
we're making a motion on.
I would love that.
Right now.
Yes.
Does it actually have to go to action items from this?
Yes, it does.
Back to action. So the ordinance itself, this change probably should have happened a long time ago, just to make it easy, that it isn't required. Keeping all of that other discussion aside, I will make a motion that we approve the ordinance change for the Community Development Director to be present regarding the city engineer.
All right. And a second?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Yes.
It's been moved by Councilmember Barber and seconded by Councilmember DeCare. Comments? Seeing none, we'll go to a vote. And it is Councilmember Barber.
Aye.
Aye.
I support the promotion of Lyle, but I don't support the lack of content and
this is just the
how much
ordinance.
this will cost us in totality. So
That would be an A then. Okay. And your aye?
I didn't speak, Madam Mayor. I think you should slow down. You've changed your tone since the President of the Senate left the room. Let's relax here. I'm fine with the ordinance change. It's a yay.
Thank you.
Aye.
And Councilmember Garn?
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Motion passes unanimously. All right. Sidewalk discussion. Mr. Belknap.
Yes. You're not going to get up at the podium? Come on.
It's your favorite place to be. Come on.
I don't like hunching over the podium all the time, and I'm not feeling incredibly well today, so my apologies. But thank you for allowing me to be back. Kind of picking up where we left off last week, as a result of our discussions last week, and also further discussions that have gone more in depth with the cities of Farmington and Layton. We provided to council members kind of a tentative draft of what this policy could look like as we approach looking to see full improvements on public streets where it makes sense. Those discussions combined with some of the discussion at the last council meeting resulted in some slight changes in what we've put together and submitted here. And I've also come ready to discuss kind of some ranking criteria. We were hoping to have a visual. Jordan Hansen, who manages GIS, is also quite the tech guru and has been working on an iPad form, so we thought it would have been nice to let you see visually, but we'll go ahead and rather just describe the criteria and how those affect ranking these projects and how we set kind of a strategic plan as we move forward in the future for these areas that lack that. So I think I'll go ahead, excuse me again, sorry, and jump into the discussion on the ranking criteria. As we met prior to Andy Thompson departing, thank you, that is much appreciated. Prior to Andy leaving, we sat down, myself and Andy, and I think we had Jordan there as well, and have had other people involved in the discussion. How do we make this kind of an empirical process where it's not really subjective, it's based on good data, good input. So what we did is we decided to break this down into 3 different categories. The code enforcement official would be the person that we primarily rely on to be going out and collecting this data, compiling that, and it would self-populate to a ranked order. They'd go to a specified section, they'd input where that is, and they'd start putting details about first category being risk. This category, let's see, is a total potential up to 60 points out of 100 points. First item on there, looking at shoulder width, whether it's a road that has curb and gutter, whether it's a road that is just asphalt and gravel shoulder, how much room adjacent to an 11-foot travel lane would a pedestrian have to walk in an area that does not have sidewalk. So depending on what that input is it 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, etc., that would spit out a value that would then factor into a total of 60 points for that category. Also in the category, what are the traffic volumes and speeds on these roads? What is the pedestrian volume? And then I think of particular interest, is this part of a school route? Is this, as we've seen with the state in Lyle presenting on the flashers at the rail trails, there is a very specific focus by the state, and I think that trickles down to us, of wanting to see safe school routes. This is probably the most highly weighted item within all of the individual items. So that makes up the risk category. Depending on what that output is, it comes out with a total. Moving on to the next category, the ease and cost kind of component. Is there existing curb and gutter in the area, making it easier to determine where sidewalk would need to go, the elevation of the sidewalk, the placement of the sidewalk horizontally. Are there grade differences that would need to be taken into account of, we've got sidewalk that's going to be here, but the adjacent yard is down here. How do we bridge that gap? Obstructions like landscape or irrigation boxes, landscaping, etc. Owner attitude. Is this something that an owner is supportive of, or are they hesitant, are they resistant? Owner contributions, or full, partial, none. Are there existing agreements in place? Getting all this data coming out to a potential of 30 points maximum. Then moving down into public input for the final category. As the official inputs these values, is this part of an active transportation plan? Is this section along one of those designated routes that the city identified in their active transportation plan? City support, is this one that the city is highly focused on? Is this something that the public is highly focused on? Not that we want to politicize or make it all about what people are appearing to look for. That's important, but it's just one piece of that scoring criteria. So that would be turned over, as I said, to the code enforcement official. Try and keep it consistent, one person doing all the scoring, so that that one person might see something one way, and definitely have an opportunity for sit-down discussion with that person before they move out. But essentially that is what we are trying to establish as part of this effort to fill in the gaps, for lack of a better term. So.
Yeah, so
I think fill in the gaps is quite appropriate.
Right. Yeah. The missing links.
We have lots of gaps in the city.
Missing links. And this has been exhaustive, all the work that you and Jordan have put into this. And so I like that the direction that you're going is taking the haphazard nature out of how we're doing curb gutter sidewalk. And so everything is going to be evaluated and ranked and hopefully put on a schedule how and when it's going to be filled in. So I really appreciate all the hard work and creative thinking also that went into this on how to structure it. So thank you, and thank you, Jordan, for putting this together. Any thoughts from council? Let's start. Stroh, did you have something?
No, just that I mean, this is, the city and the staff has my absolute full-throated support in this. I mean, this is obviously the right direction to go. Mr. Belknap has done an outstanding job at, collaborating with the rest of the city staff and, presenting something that's going to work. It's exhaustive, and it's also a very arduous process. And I commend our city staff for moving this in the right direction and taking this in the direction that it needs to go. So it's exciting. It really is.
Thank you. Any comments?
I think the direction is
Councilmember
great.
Adams.
Obviously, the work needs to be done. There's no question about that. But I think we're setting ourselves up for a whole lot of frustration and confusion in our community. You take Shepherd Lane and Sunset Drive, for example, which are coming up next year. You're going to have some folks who have a lien on their property, some folks who don't, some folks this, that, and there's so many categories and point systems here. I'm not saying there isn't a lot of great thought there, but I think it's just leaving so much gray area. You're going to disgruntle people. I mentioned,
correct.
as I expressed last time, Burton Lane folks have paid for their improvements, and it hurt several of them to do so. And then, we bring it down to the attitude, like, oh, well, that guy got mad at us. Well, it doesn't really work. We can't, I don't agree with that part. I don't think attitude should play into it at all. It's got to be a policy or whatever. Like if somebody yells at us loud enough, we're just going to walk away, or, okay, we'll give you a couple more points. We'll pay a little bit more for yours. I just think we're setting our citizens up for a lot of unrest because they're going to talk. They're going to say, oh, I didn't pay anything. And neighbor B is going to go, well, I paid $8,000. What do you mean you didn't pay anything? So,
right. One interesting discussion that we had was with Chad Bichelle, the city engineer for Farmington City, and had an opportunity to get quite candid with him. I think it's been fairly public knowledge, the process that Farmington City went through with 650 West adjacent to the new high school. And even myself, just following that in the news, but being able to talk to Chad and see, how did this actually go down? These were areas where they had elected to go with deferral agreements. I think they referred to them as extensions, where, hey, right now that's fine. You're developing, you're subdividing, you're building a home somewhere down the road. That had worked really well for them in the downtown area of Farmington City, which the old part of town didn't previously have curb and gutter. This approach worked great there, but when they came here to this area and subsequent areas in Farmington, they found that approach was met with massive amounts of resistance, even from people who, 6 months to 20 years prior had been the people themselves that had signed those agreements. So he said, the potential conflict that came into this from, trying to address the various scenarios and categories, even where they had situations, you've got an agreement, we've proposed in this revision, the owner bearing 100% of the cost of curb and gutter. He said even in that situation where they tried to do the same, in all reality, they only collected up to half at most for those properties, capping it at a certain dollar amount, unit rate per foot. So he said, we learned a lot from this process, and the discussion between neighbor and neighbor. He said that there's definitely possibility for that, but you've got to treat a property based on the category that it falls into. Of can somebody compare one property with another? Yeah, you can, but two properties are different. Right of way being that kind of sticking point. And also, discussing with Layton City, excuse me, similar discussion there of there's a huge potential for, even with agreements, for there to be additional cost, delays in projects, potential legal fees arising from this process. So the more kind of partnering that is apparent in the process and in the approach, they say paid massive dividends for them as they continue to mold their policy and approach. So,
thank you.
I think we learned a lot from Burton Lane also, and that went well. You know, I think that when we do a massive construction effort, like redoing a whole road like we did there, I've said it before, I think we just have an open house and we explain to the folks. You know, I don't think it's fair that, let's say 10 years ago there was an honest omission of somebody putting a lien against someone's property, and yet property B, 1 year prior to that, had a lien placed against his property. But somehow the guy next door slipped through the cracks. I'm sure we'll find that. But so I don't think that this is really quite the most fair way of going about it. Like Burton Lane was a total success. I appreciate all the work you've done with Farmington and Layton and appreciate their efforts, but we're Kaysville. And we've ran a pattern before, and Burton Lane was great. The folks actually lined up one by one at that pulpit and begged the council to do the curb and gutter, to change the plan. We'll pay, please put it in. So I don't know. I think we could also test the waters. I just think we're putting ourselves up for quite a bit of frustration and confusion amongst the people whom we represent.
Yeah. I think there's massive.
Today it's us. It's not you.
Yeah, I think there's potential for massive frustration and confusion, and I think part of that is also due to the fact that there hasn't been a uniform approach. So I think that's what we're hoping to establish with input from you as a body.
Would you be willing to knock the Burton Lane owners and let them know that they paid in full, and now people will be paying 50, 40, 50, 60% is all?
Yeah, if that's the direction.
Well, it's easy to throw it back on us, but it's your plan.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm
okay.
not opposed to that.
Okay. Councilmember Barber.
Mayor?
Thank you. First Councilmember Barber, then Councilmember Garn. Thanks.
I have a couple points on this. First one is the consistency of it. I've been harping on this for a long time, and Josh and his staff have been really patient, because that's where we've lacked in the past. I mean, we could spend all night talking about the problems of.
We didn't do anything in the past.
You have not been.
Like I said, we could spend literally all night talking about it. I don't see it as super productive, other than to learn. We don't want to do that. We've got to fix it going forward. We don't have any other option. The past is the past. I mean, to sound really poetic there, but we leave that in the past and we move forward. We can't mitigate all of those problems that happened, but this will help us consistently in the future, because I have the same question, about one neighbor paying this, one neighbor paying that. But if we have this process they all went through, that's extremely fair. If they have a huge disagreement on the code enforcement, how it's changed, they can go through a process for that. So I don't see a better option. I mean, I would love to hear tactile pieces of it if you have those ideas, but I think having this process will fix a lot of the problems that we had in the past. So that's the consistency piece. The second is just, we all have our personal things that we are really excited about, and mine is definitely the safe routes to school. That's not a surprise to anyone. And so I was really interested how this would play in, and it has a whole section right there. So it's section 3, and it's weighted by itself. Safe routes to school. I think that's fantastic. And if there's something that's higher priority, I have a hard time imagining that, but I would listen. I would listen to it, because there's a lot of different things that weigh in. But I'm glad that it's on there, and I don't think it was initially. We worked through and we got there. And the third piece is the outreach. And Josh, I don't think you've touched on it. You and I talked about it, but there is a plan for outreach. I don't know if it'll be the exact same open house that we've done in the past, but every resident will be contacted. They have a packet all ready to go.
It has
talking.
Oh, sorry.
No, thank you. Go ahead, Josh. I'm excited about that piece.
Sorry.
Thank you.
That's absolutely true. Whether it's from a coordination on agreements and right-of-way and things like that, or just coordination in general on, hey, the project's coming up. This is start date, timelines, expectations, etc. So,
yeah, and
absolutely.
that is a huge improvement, and that's going to be so great.
And it'll be consistent. That's what is, because even, I'm glad that we had a project that seemed like it went well, but we have lots of others that didn't because they were all done differently. If we can consistently go forward, people can see what's coming and expecting, and that their voice is weighed in, and it's just one piece. I don't think we have the risk of, like, if somebody's really vocal, that's not the only thing we'll listen to. That's one factor in a whole matrix of things that we're weighing out. So your voice is heard. That's important as representation, but it's not the only thing that weighs into it.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Garn.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to first echo what Councilmember Barber said, 100%. I'm glad she went first, so I'll make my remarks short. But I definitely support this plan. I think it's a great plan. And again, just, maybe clearly inconsistent decisions were made in the past. But at the time, they probably seemed right for the size of the community. Now they're not adequate, and we definitely need to move forward. And the other thing I would say is, I can't even have my kids agree on a movie, and so there will be some people who won't like the way that it's done, and it is hard. It's going to be hard on some people who have to pay, even those who have liens. But I believe that we're a strong people in Kaysville and that we can do hard things. And this is the right thing to do. It's right and it's good, and we need to do it. And I really believe that the citizens of Kaysville can do hard things. And then also I'd like to say that I'm grateful for Josh Belknap that he is leading is directing the Public Works Department. He's calm, he has excellent judgment, and he's highly competent. So thank you, Josh, and others for putting this plan together.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Councilmember Adams, and then Councilmember...
Just in response, Councilwoman Barber there were folks on the Burton Lane project who actually were in the old county system, so there's no liens. And they brought forth their paycheck, their checkbooks. So there was a system in place. We kind of had an ad hoc system put in place for that. Hey, yeah, residents will pay X amount, for it. And this is actually an easy thing. We're talking about giving residents a discount. What was hard, Councilmember Garn, was the folks on Burton Lane completely paying for it, and even when they didn't have liens. So this is an easier road for the residents. Of course, they're going to want to do this.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Page.
Now, I agree with a lot of what's being said here tonight. I think Councilmember Barber hit it right on the nail, though. You know what? We can't sit there and judge the past when we don't even know exactly what the thought process was. I mean, it's changed. It's changed a lot. I lived in West Layton when they annexed Layton in. And I know the situation there, and I mean, every home, the average was, we were a quarter of a mile, a third of a mile away from each other. And look at it now. And I think what you do is you go forward and you make good decisions. The facts are you're going to have a certain amount of people upset no matter what, unless we pay for 100%. And on top of that, they're still going to be upset in a lot of ways. So I think you have the policy, you do it right, you move forward, but it's a lot more complicated, I think, than what we anticipate. A good example, talking to Josh today, we had a situation where a person he developed and curb and gutter should have went through, but here's the problem. It would have cost engineering for the city tens of thousands of dollars to even determine where the road's going to end up being. Well, so what do you do? Well, so I just think that these are tough decisions, but I like the idea of having a rule, going forward with it, and doing the best we can. And I think we have to be careful. I think a lot of this problem, as the city develops and moves forward, I think a lot of this is going to be taken care of if we stick with our policies, make sure that they put the curb and gutter in, and we watch those things carefully. I think maybe as much as 50% of these ones that don't have the right-of-way agreements and stuff, they'll end up paying because that's part of the development process.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Comment on that in talking further with Farmington about, what do you do where there's this little island out in the middle of no curb and gutter. The concern is, in the future when that develops and the design curb approaches that installed piece and there's a difference in elevation and that's having to be ripped out or slopes are wrong. Farmington moved to a scenario where they just said, we're not gonna overlook those spots anymore. We're not gonna collect money in lieu of, or we're not gonna sign deferral agreements. We're gonna put the onus on the individual. Show us. Let's go out and look at the site and determine by an engineer and even looking at some surveying that this is correct, and that allows us to put the piece in there. So, and then also, I think Burton Lane, I can't applaud enough the efforts there. I know Councilmember Adams was highly involved with that project, and I think that type of communication coordination pays huge dividends of talking to people. With that, right now there is curb and gutter there, and that is material that they paid for. And there are individuals along there, as we've proposed here in the policy, that when we look at doing sidewalk in the future, and those would be individuals also, hey, you've paid for your curb and gutter, as many other people have in the city who also had agreements. But we're now trying to move forward in a faster fashion, a more equitable fashion, and so those individuals who do not have the agreements are benefiting from, hey, we're going to hopefully have donation of right-of-way and easements, and those very individuals on Burton Lane would be benefiting from sidewalk in those cases. So,
thanks, Councilmember DeCare.
I think what this, basically, I think what this boils down to, it's about creating a model of consistency and, something that's going to be congruent across the entire city. And I really feel that, by enacting something like this is moving in the right direction. People are going to complain all the time about anything. That's just the way it works. Nobody is ever going to readily accept, anything. And, but it's our job as the city to, provide something like this. And like I said, to make it congruent, to make it consistent, to make it uniform, to make it equal. So every homeowner, regardless of your circumstance, is on equal footing. This is the chart we're using. These are the metrics we're using. This is the design that we're going to use here, and it's uniform across the entire city. Whether you have a lien on your property or not, whether you own the right-of-way or not, it doesn't. Everybody's scenario is different, and I get that and I understand that. So, people want to complain about things. Well, that's up to them. But, I think that the vision and the direction that we're taking this is absolutely 100% correct. So I couldn't be happier.
All right, good discussion. I think everybody's had a chance to talk. I think it's probably time to make a motion to move this to action.
Is it the whole thing?
Let's see.
Is it?
You could probably just say work item C.
Yeah,
it's the whole thing?
So moving kind of this general policy of ranking these sections and also the approach on coordinating with property owners.
So it's the ranking and then the kind of the matrix of if we have agreements, if we don't, all of those. Is that also included? I know we'll have an action item next week, but the actual structure of the split, the 100% versus 50%, is that what we need to fine-tune next week? Or can we say this is our policy and we'll have a fee structure somewhere else? where we define it?
Ooh, I'm not sure I'm following.
I think it would be the former, that you could certainly change it next week, because that's when you make final decisions, but if you're not comfortable with 50 or 100. But
Yeah.
I think if we're doing percentages, it would be good to have it in that document. If we're talking real numbers, it's good to have it like in a fee structure or something. But
And similar to the discussion that we had about the fees for the architect, it's going to vary, right? So you can't really specifically, oops, I guess it's time for me to stop talking. But I think percentage.
Percentages won't vary, though. I mean,
Yeah, and the matrix, won't the matrix basically have percentages, Josh? Yes.
That's correct.
What I'm saying is my only hesitation in all of this discussion is the actual percentages. You know, do we stay with the 65, 45? Do we 50, 50, 50? Everything else I'm good with. So I want to know, when do we have to nail those down? So I know it's not today.
Right, in 2 weeks, unless you don't decide not to move it to action tonight.
And I do want to. That's what I'm saying is I think there's still discussion there on the actual breakdown. Percentages, yeah.
Okay.
But I want to keep moving this forward because I think this is important. It's really important.
And maybe definitely discussions can continue to happen over the next 2 weeks to get more information, and so you can have a good discussion.
That was my question. That would be nice.
Absolutely.
We would do it.
Sure.
Okay.
In 2 weeks' time.
Sorry.
Right.
I always want to come.
Oh, actually, it's going to be more than 2 weeks. It's going to be December. Yeah. So I am looking for a motion to move this to an action item.
Yeah, so moved.
Okay. And a second? Okay.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councilmember Page, seconded by Councilmember Garn. And any further comments? Councilmember Adams?
When
Sure.
you were talking about how far away, how much asphalt there is, to dirt, and, are you going to use that as a gauge as to whether or not you're going to put sidewalk in those areas? So if there's a 8-foot wide strip, from the white line to dirt for kids to walk on in safe routes, I'm a little unclear on that. Was that going to be used as part of the metrics to say, well, there's enough asphalt here, we don't need sidewalk here?
Not so much to say we don't need it.
From white line to gutter.
Right.
Are we omitting sidewalk in some scenarios in your metrics?
There is potential that could be the case. That is one of the categories within that ranking criteria of what is that shoulder width, but that doesn't necessarily say, if it's this, then we're doing it, but if it's not this, then we're not going to do it. It's more so where does that potential project fall on the list relative to the other projects.
So with the upcoming two of Shepherd Lane and Sunset Drive North, we'll call it, or Phase 1, where those are like main arteries, are we planning on, hey, these are going to have sidewalks?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is what we're trying to see accomplished.
Because those are major safe walking routes.
Major, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So that is what we're pursuing.
Yeah. Good. All right. Thank you. Let's move on to vote. Councilmember DeCare.
Aye.
Love the movement, but I think I've made my points clear, and that's the reason for the nay.
Aye.
Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes 4-1. Thank you. Lyle.
Okay. The next item, just regarding with the work session, beginning of discussion on amendments to 173125. This is essentially our cell tower ordinance. I'll start off just by noting, since having the packet sent out, made note that you don't actually have the ordinance before you to see the text. So that would probably behoove you not to maybe move it to action yet, and we're okay with that. We're not rushing to push this forward, but if you'll allow me, despite that, maybe to give a brief introduction to what we're looking at in general, we'll make sure you have that specific text before you. I would think before moving that towards an action agenda, and we can discuss that in more detail. But essentially, what this is considering, we've had over the last few years, different people come to the office with different ideas as to how to do cell towers in the city that are a little more creative than what we currently permit. And then based on feedback from the Planning Commission on those we have done, I think we decided to pursue this to allow kind of a paradigm shift in what we've seen in the city. Currently, at least I brought a couple images for you. Cell towers in Kaysville, we pretty much only allow one type. It's a monopole, it has co-location. This is the one just off of 200 North that you can see that includes multiple users on it. Just guessing a little bit, when that was put together originally, I think the city decided we would have less towers, but we would let them be taller, a little bit bigger, and in hopes of having them more spread out throughout the city. And so this would be a little bit of a paradigm shift where we would still allow these types of towers. In fact, there are several around that would continue to exist based on the ordinance, and I'll show you at least where that text is. And again, you can actually review it once you have it. But the idea would be maybe to allow more creativity in towers. So you'll see here some good and bad examples. I'm not saying these are all good for Kaysville, but as we discuss this with the Planning Commission, you see around the nation all kinds of creative ways to put up antenna and equipment that may be tasteful in some scenarios and may not be. A big core and crux of the discussion that was had with the Planning Commission is how open do you want to let this? So if we're diverting from the tall monopole tower in some situations, do you let somebody come with the pine tree, or excuse me, the palm tree, for example, which clearly doesn't work within Kaysville.
Come on.
Looks way better.
Well, there's some beautiful things. You go to Vegas or Phoenix, right? You probably see those on just about every corner. The water tower, pretty tasteful, in my opinion, but also out of place in Kaysville. But something like that could work. Pine tree is very common in Utah, where they'll actually design towers that look like that. We talked about roof-mounted and utility pole, other type of equipment and attachment. And so ultimately, it was the Planning Commission's passed along is a recommendation to move that direction to allow more diversity in type of towers. Here you can see where we currently have towers around town. I think there are 6 of them in total. A little bit tough to see on the projector, but the black dots representing those scattered throughout the city. A lot of them kind of in the core and crux here close by. And the colored spots that you see there are where they're currently permitted. So they're permitted on agricultural zone properties or commercial or light industrial zone properties, and that does include right here Main Street Central commercial zoning as well. It was felt that controlled correctly, there may be other locations that are appropriate when done under those stealth or more creative tower types, but we wanted to make sure that there was some pretty tight limitations on that so they didn't pop up where you don't want them. So there's language in there that houses can't have them. They would be allowed essentially on properties at least 10 acres in size or larger. They have to be occupied by a public or quasi-public use. So essentially parks, schools, churches, assuming they have the property size and distance separation from residential zones, could consider those creative tower types. This gives you an example of some of those. Not all these would actually qualify because these are simply properties over 10 acres in size. I probably could have further filtered it, but Wilderness Park, the DTC, Barnes Park, a lot of these are residential, a lot of it's UDOT land on here, so it's a little bit misconception. So if you want to see that more and fine-tune, I'd be happy to refine the data and information for you again before making a decision. So we'd just be happy to take that type of feedback, and we can spend the time to do that. But in short, ultimately what the Planning Commission passed along was the idea of allowing them. The ordinance takes pieces that are kind of spread throughout our ordinance, puts it all into one table in one location where you know what types are allowed and where. And instead of, again, allowing companies to, it was a fun discussion where you want to encourage the creativity. There's some really interesting things people could do where you wouldn't know there's ever an antenna. But they wanted to be able to say no to the wrong things, and the direction that we headed was we've got to be specific. If we're not, and we're leaving it open to interpretation, the applicant's going to do what they want to do, whether we like it or not. So essentially what they said is we would allow in these newer locations, wouldn't have to co-locate, so it wouldn't be as big or as tall. Typically our towers are 120 feet. They chopped that down to 90 feet on this type of tower. it would either have to be on an existing utility pole or light standard. So you see them at high schools all over the place where they're just above the football field light posts, something of that nature. Or it would have to be disguised essentially as a tree that's on the Kaysville City tree list. So it has to be something that fits in our area, not a palm tree or a cactus, which I've also seen cactus towers. So they do get all types. In addition to that, it allowed for roof mount and wall mount antennas in certain locations. And it gives some pretty specific details on what those can look like and how big. So pretty detailed for just an introduction. Again, apologize. I don't know for what reason it's not in the packet. Probably my own fault on not attaching it correctly. But based on that, it makes sense probably to keep it on a work agenda. But if there's additional direction on what else you think you might need to see to help with a decision, I'd be happy to take that input and prepare that for you at a future meeting.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I probably wouldn't want to move this to action until we actually have seen the ordinance. So good point.
Apologies.
Point well taken. Councilmember DeCare, did you have something?
Actually, go ahead. Councilmember Barber.
Councilmember Barber.
So if we do approve this ordinance, which we'll see and look at more next week, do we ever see or approve as the council body the actual towers themselves, or do they just come to?
Yeah, so as when we worked through that type of approval with the Planning Commission, in some sense you could. So typically almost all land use, once the zoning is in place, it's either administrated through the staff or the Planning Commission as a permitted or conditional use. We talked about permitted versus conditional, who ought to be looking at them. As proposed, the Planning Commission would be the approval body through the conditional use process on each one of these. And to be honest, it's pretty detailed on what the requirements are, so it doesn't really give a lot of latitude both for the proposer or the Planning Commission. But where they're new, they wanted to continue to have that purview. And again, as you look at the text, you can determine whether that's sufficient or not. Where you would have some say as a city council, as proposed, would be when somebody's requesting it on a zone that doesn't currently allow it or a location that doesn't. They would come to you and say, we think it works here. Do a zoning request for something that would accommodate and permit it. So that is how it is written, at least.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember DeCare?
Just a quick comment. I mean, I've exhaustively pored over this, the changes and the modifications in this ordinance and that and stuff, and obviously we don't have it before us today, so I think that, abstaining from this is probably a good idea, but I definitely think it's all in the right direction, and that, I mean, I'm intimately familiar with the cell tower industry too. I mean, that's what I do for a portion of my work too, so, but I think that I think the city, is certainly moving in the right direction here, so, yeah. But holding off, tabling this or however we want to do it, I think it's a good idea, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Garn, anything?
Yeah, I would just agree with the comments that have been made so far, that it's a good direction. Let's see the details, and then we can move it forward.
Okay. Councilmember Page.
Yeah, just comment. Are we dealing in this, are we looking at also the small cell applications in the city? I know that they really talked about that for a couple of years of the legislature. And
yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. So the legislature did put together some new legislation that speaks to how those are handled. I'm going to get my nomenclature wrong here probably a little bit, but these types of towers that we're looking at here I think are called the macro sites. And so they're the larger, a little bit more robust. Small versus macro, I would almost reverse those myself, so that's why I get them mixed up. But the small cell sites often fit on an existing telephone pole or a city light or something out on a street light. And so the state requirement, as I understood it, and speaking with our power department who deals most directly with those, is that when there are considerations for those, that they have standards in place on how they would fix and attach. So they're very small antenna equipment, thus the small cell that would go on those. So that would be separate from this particular piece. Okay. Hopefully we've handled that appropriately, but speaking with our power department, and they've kind of followed that legislation, yeah, they'll look at that separate in their standards on how to accommodate those particular users.
Okay. Sorry.
Finished.
Did you have something?
Councilmember Adams.
Right.
No, Councilmember DeCare.
Just real quick. those small cell sites in that it is, they're less obtrusive, less invasive, more, they blend in more aesthetically in that. I mean, it's mostly rooftop mounts, it's existing poles, it's, you know, you're not looking at a giant monopole or, you know, anything like that. It's very, you know, it kind of blends in with the aesthetic of, you know, of the environment that it's in. In fact, you don't even, hell, half the time you don't even realize that it's there, you know. So smaller antennas, you know, it's a lot less obtrusive. So.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Adams, did you have something?
No, I'm good.
All right. Okay, I'd probably entertain a motion to move this back to work next.
Motion to table.
All right.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved by Councilmember Adams, seconded by Councilmember DeCare. And let's go with Councilmember Adams.
I'll add, based on the recommendation of Lyle Gibson, though, to that motion, and aye.
Aye.
Councilmember Gurn.
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes 5-0. All right. We have come to the end of our agenda. Do we have anybody signed up for call to the public? Okay. Okay, let's go with anything on power.
No, nothing to report on power.
Okay. Public Works.
Yes, I'd just like to make take a personal liberty, if I may, and just say I'm here in California at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners meetings, and I think I just tie this into the importance of our public infrastructure. Apparently these fires in Paradise, the tragic loss of life, I mean, still hundreds missing, 56 confirmed dead, 8,000 structures. Think about that. They have 27,000 people in Paradise, California, and there's 8,000 structures and homes destroyed. There's maybe 9,000 in Kaysville. So I thought of Kaysville, you know, the 32,000 people in Kaysville, about the same size town. And apparently the fire started from PG&E arcing of the power lines and, of course, tinder dry drought conditions and that combination. But I just thought of our infrastructure, you know, water, power, roads, how important those are to us. And when they fail, like in the case of this power line, sometimes it can be catastrophic. So it's just so important that we have highly competent professional staff and that we stay on top of our infrastructure for many reasons, and one so tragically illustrated by what's going on here in California.
Thank you. Let's see, community development.
No, I think I'm fine.
All right. Parks and Recreation?
Just excited for Pioneer Park's improvements we saw today.
And also, on the 26th, we will be having our tree lighting starting, I believe festivities start at 5. The tree lighting will be at 6. And it's usually a fun time is had by all. So
go see Santa, go see Elf across the street.
And there's going to be another special guest that you will meet if you come, but I don't want to let it go and let the cat out of the bag. So
it's Councilmember Adams.
Yeah.
I was going to say that.
Is the gypsy coming back?
I don't know.
Church
You'll
lady coming back?
You'll have to show up and find out. All right, and then youth court. Anything?
No, nothing to talk about there.
Okay. No. And Youth City Council, I heard they found their shirts.
Yes.
Hallelujah.
Big win.
Oh, right. Yeah, big win there.
That was a big win.
I didn't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
We tracked them down. It was the Kaysville mystery. We found them. But also, thank you to Youth City Council for our work on our veterans program.
Yes.
And it was a great event. And we have even better different ideas for next year. So.
Okay. Thanks. I want to mention a couple things. I did a training through the Utah Association of Special Districts board training. Something that I learned, that I'll just throw out there. We are not supposed to be using electronic media to communicate with either each other or the public while City Council is in session. So if you do, then your correspondences can be grandma requested. So did not know that, but moving forward, just use your best judgment. Another thing is we are going to be opening up our process for our Power Commission. We have some seats coming up. We will have details on that at the next meeting. Actually, Shane, you have it pretty well spelled out. I just can't remember it off the top of my head.
We were just going to start advertising on the 1st. We have three open seats, and then one is another person's probably going to resign. So we might have 4 spots there.
Right.
And we'll follow a similar process with the Planning Commission. I think we have some dates there from starting in December 1st, having him do 3 weeks, about the 21st, and then having interviews the first part of January. And hopefully have appointments the second meeting in January ready for service on the February 1st.
Yeah. And Councilmember DeCara, I hope you'll help me with the interview process.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yes.
We put that in the listing already, so good thing you could say yes.
We forgot to ask you.
It's all fine.
All right. Okay. I've added a city manager report just as a place saver in case something comes up that you want to brief the council on. Do you have anything you need to communicate?
I don't have anything I need to. We do make guesses about how long the meetings are going to be, so this is a good opportunity for me to either be very much longer than I would normally be if it's something I might win a $2
you have a bet
bill or
on
something.
The line.
Yeah, it seems
that's
inappropriate, ethical.
Speaking out of turn over there.
I just wanted to, I will be brief. I just want to reiterate that I'm very excited about Lyle and his new appointment. And besides sitting down with him and Josh this morning, Lyle and I just sat down and talked about the department, and I'm very excited. And I'll be sharing some more things with you on some possible changes that we're wanting to make, and I think they're very exciting. Also, I mentioned this in my weekly email, but we are putting in for a grant for the Volkswagen settlement money for some electric vehicle charging stations throughout the city. We're putting in for 18 charging stations, and I think we have a great shot at getting that grant. And I'm very excited about that too. So that's all I'll say tonight.
That's great.
So excited about
All right. Thank you.
I'll get Teslas.
All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn. Oh, so moved, yeah.
All right, and seconded by, so it's been moved by Councilmember DeCare, seconded by Councilmember Barber. All in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you.